Imagine waking up, total darkness, no air, barely any room to move. You scream, but nobody hears you because you're 6 feet underground inside a wooden box, and everyone you know already thinks you're dead. Sounds like pure nightmare fuel, right? Well, here's the unsettling part. For hundreds of years, this wasn't just some scary story people told around a fire. It was a very real, very documented fear. And honestly, sometimes it actually happened. So today, let's talk about why being buried alive was such a massive fear throughout history, and why people eventually got desperate enough to invent coffins with bells, breathing tubes, and escape hatches. First, you've got to understand something about old medicine. It was basically guesswork dressed up as science. Doctors back then had no stethoscopes until the 1820s. No real way to detect a faint heartbeat. No machines, nothing. So, when someone fell into a deep coma, or had a seizure disorder, or simply looked pale and still, doctors would often just declare them dead. And once that happened, burial usually followed fast, sometimes within a day. Now here's where it gets even more intense. During the cholera and yellow fever outbreaks of the 18th and 19th centuries, this problem got dramatically worse. These diseases moved fast, and so did the panic around them. People feared contagion so badly that bodies were often buried in a rush, with barely any time to properly confirm if the person was truly gone or just deeply unconscious. Speed mattered more than certainty, and that combination, fast-spreading disease plus primitive medicine, created the perfect storm for tragic mistakes. And people noticed. Newspapers loved this topic, honestly, because it was terrifying and irresistible at the same time. One widely cited 1837 estimate out of France claimed roughly 4 people a day were being mistakenly buried alive. Later, in 1895, a study in England and Wales suggested the number could be even higher annually. Now, historians today debate how accurate these specific numbers really were. Exaggeration was common, fear sells stories, and that hasn't changed in 200 years. But even if the real number was lower, the fact that society believed it could be, that common tells you everything about how deep this fear had sunk into the culture. This fear even had a name, taphophobia. And once people started fearing something this specifically, of course, someone was going to try to profit off solving it. Enter the safety coffin. The earliest known versions show up around the mid-1700s. Often just a small glass pane built into the lid, so loved ones, or grave watchmen, could check the face for any signs of life. But by the 1790s, things got way more elaborate. In 1792, a duke in Germany commissioned a coffin built specifically for himself, complete with a window for light and a tube to allow fresh air inside, just in case. From there, inventors really leaned in. One of the most famous designs came from a German doctor named Johann Gottfried Taberger in 1829. His system connected ropes to the corpse's hands, feet, and head, all linked to a bell sitting above ground. If the person inside woke up and moved even slightly, the bell would ring, alerting the cemetery watchman. And honestly, this is very likely where the old saying, "saved by the bell," comes from. But maybe the boldest move came from a doctor named Adolf Gutsmuth. To prove his safety coffin actually worked, he had himself buried alive in it, on purpose, for several hours. And his assistant fed him soup and sausages through a built-in feeding tube the entire time. He came out completely fine, fear conquered, point proven. By the time the 19th century was in full swing, this wasn't just a niche obsession anymore. It became an industry. In Germany alone, more than 30 different safety coffin designs were officially patented in just the second half of the 1800s. In America, over 20 patents were filed between 1868 and 1925. These weren't just bells anymore either. Some included spring-loaded lids that would pop open at the slightest movement. Others had breathing tubes built directly into the design, just in case rescue took time. Now, here's the twist people don't always expect. Despite dozens of patents and genuinely clever engineering, historians haven't found strong documented evidence that these safety coffins actually saved anyone in a real emergency. Most of them were either too complicated, too expensive, or simply never mass-produced enough to matter. So in a strange way, the invention wasn't really about solving the problem. It was about solving the fear of the problem, and those aren't always the same thing. This fear didn't stay confined to engineering either. It leaked straight into culture. Edgar Allan Poe practically built part of his literary career on this exact anxiety, writing his story, The Premature Burial, in 1844, describing a narrator so consumed by this fear that he refuses to leave home and obsessively prepares an escape plan just in case. Around the same era, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was tapping into a very similar cultural unease, that blurry, uncomfortable line between life and death. Honestly, the Gothic horror boom of that century wasn't a coincidence. It was a society quietly terrified of getting the most important judgment call of all completely wrong. So, when you zoom out, this whole story isn't really about coffins at all. It's about uncertainty and how brutal it feels when medicine simply can't give you a clear yes or no answer to something this serious. We like to imagine the past as primitive and us as advanced, safely past all this. But in reality, people back then were doing exactly what we do with the same broken tools, trying to engineer their way around a fear that science of the time genuinely couldn't promise them an answer to. So, the next time you hear someone joke about being saved by the bell, remember, that phrase probably came from a real bell tied to a real rope, built for a fear that, for a long stretch of history, was disturbingly hard to rule out.